It's Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, have been set the task of watching a Doctor Who story and trying to see if I can guess my friends' favourite things about each episode.
Hi there, Toby, and hi everyone. My name is Jess Jurkovic. I'm a jazz pianist, arranger, composer in New York City. And most recently, in the last 4 years, I've been doing a YouTube project called the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who Project, where I transcribe my favorite bits of Dudley Simpson music and create a solo piano arrangement of those pieces. I'm choosing Fury from the Deep.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to episode 4 of Fury from the Deep, which I'm sure I used to put on a lot of my which missing episodes would you like returned fantasy lists. Quite often I would, choose various loan installments, and I think on balance I went for episode 4 of Fury, even though there's plenty in all of the other episodes. 3's got the cliffhanger, 2 and 3 have both got the cliffhangers. 2's got that Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill bit, but we have that now. We didn't have that when I was a wee lad. And we're off the back of episode 3, which lasted for 20 minutes. This one, I think, is 24 minutes, something or other. So I am going to press select. I'm on the Blu-ray of Fury from the Deep, Disc 3, the reconstruction, and I'm going to press enter on episode 4 in 3, 2, 1. I'm furious, I'm from the deep. That's what I used to sing. It's just coming to my head. In my son's bath. Gosh, now, 20 years ago, more than, because we had a sponge that was the same shape. It was green and it was shaped like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And I called, because I'm pathetic and a child, I called the sponge Fury from the Deep. And I used to sing, I'm furious, I'm from the deep. It kept me amused whilst trying to pretend that I was communicating with a baby. So this is lovely, and yeah, Jess chose this really haunting piece of music and explained it so beautifully in his assessment of episode 3. It's a great shot, isn't it, of Robson silhouetted in the foreground and Maggie walking off into the sea. I remember I wrote to the cast of this. I wrote to Victor Madden, Roy Spencer, who plays Harris, and John Abineri, who plays Van Lutyens, as a youth. We didn't know where June Murphy was. She was only discovered relatively recently, married to Perkins, Brian Cullingford, who comes into this episode. But I remember Roy Spencer saying, he watched in admiration as his wife, in inverted commas, walked into the sea, because I believe it was very cold. And I remember in the Hugh David interview in Doctor Who magazine, one of the summer specials, one of the best issues of Doctor Who magazine ever, interviewing this brilliant seeming director, who was married, did I say last time, he was married to Vyra from The Ark in Space. And he said that, he had to make her sort of get on her knees and then duck under and everything. And then she was immediately whisked back to the hotel for a hot bath and probably a brandy. Yeah, they gave you alcohol in those days. Ha 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 ha. So here is John Abineri. He's got a very high crown, I believe. I don't know if he was a. I remember my mum worked with somebody they called Tone the Toop. It was a thing in those days, a toupee. And he was bald later in life, but I think a couple of people have said that he was a little bit sensitive about his high crown, which, as a balding man, there's less stigma, I think, these days. I think I should. Hubert Rees, the chief engineer, is also a bit thin on top. Perhaps that's why I like this story so much. It's there's key roles given to the follically challenged. I think I should either go one way or the other, but I always seem to forget to pay attention to my hair. I was watching something the other day, and Jimmy Ellis was in it. It was the Billy Plays on BBC 4, and Jimmy Ellis sort of combed his hair and brushed his hair. People used to do that. I haven't got a hairbrush. That's terrible, isn't it? And then I look at pictures of myself and go, oh God, I look a mess. But I have plenty of opportunity not to. Anyway, that's just a decide. Why haven't I got a hairbrush? I'm a grown man. You have to forgive me, by the way. I'm full of a cold. Shirley is very poorly upstairs, but I'm recording this on the day before it's going out for patrons who have just got, rather excitingly, this is relevant. Oh, and I do like this. Jamie and Victoria having a moment. This is brilliant, isn't it? This is because they're seeding in the departure of Victoria, whose departure doesn't come out of the blue. I mean, you know, we know very well that many a Doctor Who companion has gone, "Hello, I've just met you. Shall we be married?" Or Leela's case, I mean, with Andred. I've barely looked at you for 6 episodes, but I'm going to hold your hand at the end of the story. You're going to look slightly surprised. And I'm, you know, probably not really my type. Whereas Victoria instead goes, "Will you be my mum and dad?" Lovely couple. And they just go, "Yeah, you could stay with us as long as you like," even though actually having another mouth to feed, paying bills, where's she going to get clothes? She's got 1 set of clothes. She's going to need some pants immediately. But anyway, I josh because this is actually very nicely done. I think the idea that, you know, travelling with the Doctor would, you know, it would we never really cover that, do we? You know, in a Doctor Who story, we see people die all the time and we get inured to it. Most of us, if we're very lucky in our lives, tend not to see people dying, and when we do, it's quite a momentous thing that probably stays with us. Well, it does stay with us forever. And, you know, can cause great psychological problems. In Doctor Who, it's kind of, it's just one of the things. Yeah, it's a bit like sunshine and you know, cups of tea. There will be several instances of each per story, and it's kind of goes with the turf. But I think it's very bold to let this story unfold and show the effect that it's having on the companion who, history tells us, you know, leaves at the end of the story. But they really do give it quite a lot of weight, and it's very nice for the actor involved. You know, that Deborah Watling, who quite often doesn't get an awful lot to do bar scream. Another great shot of that film's out of Robson, I think, and I wonder if they've reversed it for the recon, but looked a little bit like that film was out of phase on the telesnap. But it looks really cold on this beach. It looks biting and grim. I mean, we've all been to the British seaside. I don't think Fury from the Deep is going to be part of the sort of advertising campaign to get people on Britain's beaches. Although the advantage of doing this sort of and releasing the episodes before I've done the whole story is that John Deere, who's a lovely fella and expert on Quatermass, he does the Bergcast podcast, but he also really knows his old telly, and he's currently absolutely embedded within the ghost stories for Christmas, the most famous one of which is, you know, "Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You," with Michael Hordern in stark black and white on a beach, and it's that beach. John tells me that is the beach from Fury from the Deep, so that is rather marvellous. And this is where Gary Russell, in his review for Doctor Who magazine, he says, you know when Van Lutyens is going down to the impeller, he isn't coming out again. Well, I've always known that, because the first time I'd heard of Van Lutyens, I knew he didn't make it to the end of the story. So I was quite surprised it was as far into the tale as it is. But at least it's been, John Abernethy has been given time to get guest star billing in the Radio Times. Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill, and that's very discordant. It's not an organ, is it? But it sounds like a sort of kazoo noise being played on the organ, and I don't know. It sounds a bit like Pob being dragged through a mangle and turned into music. But this is great, because this is, you know, the descending down, and then with the torch, and then this this. It's not a piano, is it? But it sounds like a sort of ghostly. It is a piano. You need Jess, but it's a sort of echoey piano, sort of slightly discordant. Discordant is very much the word for some of this music. And this looks great, because he's gone. It's nothing like a sort of inexorable descent down into trouble. He's Harris is too distracted with his wife, so Van Lutyens is kind of the senior sort of guest hero type. But I think you've realised now that he's slightly expendable. So that foam, I think, because of the dark lighting and everything, it does look a bit scarier than it does in the Seeds of Death. It's the lighting here is pretty good, and that's pretty horrendous. Being dragged down and seeing the hand go down, and that panning on the torch. That's all that's left of him. But yeah, that's really effective, isn't it? That's a great scene, and I remember John Abernethy telling me that it was quite dangerous for him because he had to find a little platform with his feet and then sort of duck under. But that's really nice. That's a good scene. That's well done. And that's the end of Van Lutyens, although he does not die, because this is one of those rare stories, everybody, where nobody is killed. It's still, I think, regarded as one of the scariest of all of the Doctor Who stories, and it just goes to show you don't need vast numbers of victims to make something scary. It's the threat, it's the heartbeat, it's the suggestion, it's the menace, and I suspect, we don't know, but I suspect it's the direction as well. I think Hugh David seems to have infused the thing with atmosphere and an unsettling vibe. Although it has to be said, there is one person I know who watched this at the time who said they found it a bit boring. But then again, there are stories that I watched as a kid that I found a bit boring that I now think are absolutely marvellous. So that's don't trust the kids. So yes, I was talking before about Victoria getting a really decent slice of the action. It's a very strange story, this, isn't it? I'm not, I think when I did it for Running Through Corridors, I slightly worried, or I slightly felt it was a bit too similar to what had gone before. But I actually think in its sort of story beats and aspects like Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill, who are not like anything really in this season, or really in much of Doctor Who. I think this is a story that's quite difficult to quantify. It feels like it's the template of the base Under Siege, but it has the domesticity of the Harris's house, and Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill going into somebody's bedroom, invading a sort of flat that has a kitchen and sort of recognisable home life, with a lovely couple, the Harrises, who are a very normal couple, and I think deliberately drawn as quite a sort of normal, kind, likeable, nice couple. And I think that invasion of the domestic is pretty unusual. Is it, in fact, the first sort of person's house? We've seen Sir Charles's house, but he's a minister, and his house is quite smart in the War Machines, isn't it? But just to go into a sort of ordinary couple's house and then find, one silent cadaver and one, some sort of terrifying, whatever Mr. Oak is, Billy, kind of charming Billy Bunter type. These two silent menaces. But yes, and this story is also quite personal to me, as I think I've said earlier. This was where I suddenly felt like I possessed Doctor Who sort of in my own way. Do you know what I mean? I'd staked a claim for this story, not over anybody else, but that where I felt satisfied in my own sort of love for a particular manifestation of the program. Even though, as it turned out, I knew so little about it, I didn't even know what some of the characters looked like. But I felt there was something that I'd sort of discovered and taken ownership of, and was special to me. And as I say, the actors kept sort of leaping into my life in strange, different places. Now here's Margaret John as Megan Jones, who returns to Doctor Who in The Idiot's Lantern, which I've just done as a bonus Happy Times and Places. Uh, now, can I say this? I think Patrick Troughton and Margaret John got on quite well during the making of Fury from the Deep, from what I have picked up from people to whom I have spoken, and I shall leave it at that. But she's a very strong female character, and I wonder why there's a Welsh vibe going on, because Hugh David was Welsh, the director, but he's not cast a Welsh actress, Margaret John, just out of nowhere, because Megan Jones is obviously a very Welsh name. So I wonder why there's a Welsh vibe. We often think of the Green Death as the Welsh story, and then Delta and the Bannermen, and then of course, Doctor Who finds its home in Wales. But there's a bit of a Welsh thread running through this, and Megan Jones is a good character. Who and I like the history that she has with Robson. That to me creates a real world, and a real. I do find the world building that Victor Pemberton has done with this, where people's sort of friendships and relationships are. He doesn't go overboard with them, but he underlines them with a kind of a realism, a verisimilitude. I know is a word I overuse. Or I went through a phase of overusing it. I don't think I've used it that much recently. Stephen Shapansky and the Radio Free Scarrow Boys used to always pick me up on verisimilitude, so I think I maybe hypnotised myself not to use it anymore. So there is something creepier about the bubble bath in this than in Scenes of Death, and I think it's the thrashing weed beneath it. But yeah, the injection of Megan Jones and Perkins is rather, it brings a new dynamic in. And Perkins is played by Brian Cullingford, who has an association with Riggs because he was a DJ, Radio Caroline or one of those. He was. There was. People might not know there was pirate radio in the UK where, for some reason, if you were not actually on the mainland, you could run a radio station. If you've seen the film, the Richard Curtis film, The Boat That Rocked, that touches into that. I love that. I think the thrashing there of the seaweed really works. So if it is realised like that throughout, I think it doesn't look like that's basically Peter Day's arm. I've been to Peter Day's house. He's not terribly well at the moment, sadly, but he's and I've spotted him in Quatermass in the Pit on some of the film sequences, because he was one of the first visual effects assistants. In fact, I've just been writing a chapter for my Quatermass book, coming soon, folks, about Jack Kine and Bernard Wilkie. I just dug out my taped interview with Jack Kine and have digitized it, which is why I found... God, I started talking about this and then interrupted myself. What a surprise, earlier in the episode. I found a tribute to Patrick Troughton from Radio 4, done by Jack May, General Hermack in The Space Pirates, who was a mate of Troughton's and was a Radio 4 star, because he was Nelson Gabriel in The Archers, who I remember having a brilliant line once when he'd done his dialogue or whatever, and then some two other characters were having quite an intimate conversation. So to make his escape, he sort of said, "I think I've become surplus to requirements," and I do like the idea of being surplus to requirements. I can do a Jack May. I can't do many impressions, but I think I can do a Jack May. "We are going to be too late again," but he does a tribute to Patrick Troughton, and he. So I digitized it because I wanted to digitize some of the interviews, the priceless interviews I've done with Doctor Who and Quatermass people over the years. Because of course I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat at night because I've got a cassette, and I think, what happens if somebody wipes it? And I did actually lose one. I lost one that was a tape with the designer Clifford Hatts of Quatermass in the Pit, and I still have sleepless nights about that. I had backed it up, and I still do have a backup copy, but the fact that I lost the original, just like, well, how come? And I know when I lost it, I was transcribing it at a friend's flat when I was at university, and I think I must have left it there, and then he didn't know where it was. Anyway, so this precious stuff. I mean, yeah, well, no, it's appropriate, isn't it? Because I'm talking about 6 episodes here that we can't see any of, because people accidentally... Somebody took Fury from the Deep to their mate's house and left it there. If only it had been that sort of carelessness rather than wanton destruction. Would that make it better? I don't know. I like the way Victor Madden does this. But it does strike me that he's already done something quite similar, because he had that. Because I remember talking about how much I like that bit where he said that they're getting at me. So there are, and I know that the Chief and Van Lutyens have had sort of, back and forth 2 episodes in a row. So much as I love this, I think I can understand the people who go, there's a bit of sort of similar back and forth. And the introduction of Megan Jones and Perkins, may change the dynamic slightly, but it doesn't really affect the story particularly. She has the nice bond with Robson that we see later on, which I think is very, very effective. But she doesn't really shift the plot. She advocates blowing up the rigs and all of that sort of stuff, but from a position of authority. But one of the others could really do that. But strong female character in the Troughton era, good thing. So yes, and Perkins, her factotum, who doesn't do an awful lot, does, however, as was it Richard Straw in my? I think it was you, Richard, wasn't it? Who picked up on my reference to pampas grass and said that what are Maggie Harris and Perkins getting up to? Because Brian Cullingford, who played Perkins, meets June Murphy, who plays Maggie Harris in Fury from the Deep, and if they hadn't been cast in this Doctor Who story, they wouldn't be married to this day. Isn't that lovely? All these years later, there's a married couple, they're both still around. I've never had the pleasure, actually. I emailed back and forth with Brian, but he seems quite a busy man, and they're always moving house, it seems. And as I say, the BBC hadn't traced June for years and years, because I think she's now called Laura. Oh, I love this. Here's Chief Baxter, played by Richard Mays, the fine classical actor Richard Mays, who, as I say, was doing loads of great theatre when I was learning about Fury from the Deep, and the Guardian National Theatre Reviews seem to have Richard Mays playing key roles all the time. And all he does in this is sort of appear on a screen and get dragged off. But I am a sucker for a scene in Doctor Who where somebody's on a screen and gets dragged off. I love that bit in the Makrit era. There's something about not being able to help someone. There's something about watching somebody, imperiled on a screen and you can't do anything about it. That I think really speaks. It's sort of almost dreamlike, isn't it? Where quite often you'll be in a situation you think, oh, I can help, and then something will impede it. Your hands turn to jelly, or your feet are in custard, or whatever. That idea of being the person being tangible and then being really, really close, but divided to enough that you can't actually interact or do anything and can just look helplessly on. And that's a beautiful Doctor Who-y thing. That's the sort of stuff you get in Doctor Who that is just, I just love. It's familiar, and yet it never fails to be exciting and compelling and moving and all that. This is a lovely scene where Jamie thinks Victoria's dead. The material for the companions in this story is very, very good. I love Fraser Hines. He's and I don't miss this to sound the wrong way. He's a real pro. He's always on point. He's quite instinctive. Well, but he's got the technique as well. But he's just always on point. Fraser. But doesn't make it look hard. Do you know what I mean? He's very casual is the wrong word, but he wears it quite lightly. But yeah, he's always bang on. He's a real pro. He's a proper professional. And I think when they give him, I think that scene where he finds Victoria dead, I think he does really, really sweetly. He's a great comedian, and I'm not sort of surprised when Fraser invests something with a bit of business and is funny, because that's kind of what he enjoys doing. But I really like it when you see when they give him something slightly different to do from his normal shtick, and I think that's a lovely scene. It's funny because I was going to choose John Abernethy and Van Lutyens and all of that as my favourite bit from this episode. But actually, I think Fraser might have just stolen it then. Because that's gonna, yeah, that. Oh, but I think I'm more likely to get the points off Jess. So I was gonna steal the fact that John Abernethy. I talked a lot about him last time, and he was an actor that you know always seemed to be in my sphere of reference, and whose presence in this seemed to be just a beautiful coincidence. And he's entered my life in various different phases of it. And the fact that he gets promoted to guest star credit, and that he gets this brilliant scene, this brilliant death scene, and this is the end of it. It's not a death scene because he doesn't die. I wish we could see this cliffhanger. It's great. Again, it's because it's really a piece of it. It's a sort of statement from the Doctor. Nobody's really under threat, but it works. It's the Battle of the Giants. So I was gonna choose a very personal thing. And because I then met John Abernethy's niece at university, and he's a running sort of thread in my Moths Ate My Doctor Who scarf show, and he would pop up in things. He's in, and I was into Survivors for a bit, and he's a regular in that, and he's he's the butler in the famous Ferrero Rocher commercial, and he's even got a line in The Godfather Part 3. It's not to love, eh? And he turned up. He's in a Yellow Pages commercial as well, where he's an old war veteran. But in fact, Nicholas Courtney, I remember, told me he was up for the butler in the Yellow Pages commercial, and he saw John Abernethy in the waiting room. He's like, he always gets the adverts I go up for. So he did. He was a good actor, John Abernethy, and I was going to choose a very personal thing, all that sort of confluence of this, and it's his first Doctor Who, and he goes on to be General Carrington, the Ambassadors of Death, and Railton in Death to the Daleks, and Ranquin in The Power of Kroll. But to my surprise, because I'd forgotten, I think that scene where Jamie goes in, and because we'd had an earlier scene where there's Victoria and the Doctor, and Victoria getting upset about the toll that travelling through time and space, and the death and the torment, and the stuff that would test the mettle of a great many of us, let alone a young woman from Victorian England. So I am choosing the slow seeding of Victoria's departure, but I know that that might come into play in episode 6 as well, because the story ends very early and we have that protracted leaving. But I think the fact that they're feeding it in, and I think that very tender moment and the very lovely stuff we have with the regulars, which we're not always afforded in Doctor Who, even in six-parters that are quite padded. Often it's sort of there's some sort of cheap jeopardy in a way, is a bit of messing about with business. And actually, Victor Pemberton's done a very unusual thing here, where he's given quite lovely moments to the regulars, which of course you would do because they're great. I don't think Victoria always gets the best slice of the pie, as it were. And I remember running through corridors, finding a quite one note when I was watching the stories all in one go, which is mad when you think about it, because she has that scene with Troughton in Tomb of the Cybermen. She's got these bits in this. All goes to show, give your actors something to do. And I think that was lovely. And I think Fraser's particularly good in that scene where he finds Victoria. So I'm choosing the bit where Jamie finds Victoria and says, please don't be dead. But because that's also part of this, slowly feeding in the exit of Victoria that is to come. So sorry, John Abernethy, for whom I have great affection. But also, I've gone with my heart. I've gone with what I've surprised myself going for that. But there's also a little part of my brain that goes, and let's be fair, Jess is probably more likely to have chosen that than to have chosen the fact that I like John Abernethy. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm a bit full of a cold. So, what has Jess chosen for part 4?
Okay, on to episode 4, where things are really starting to heat up or foam up. We get a lovely scene of Jamie believing Victoria is dead. There are several nice scenes of character-driven action, and I really like that scene in particular. I love the horror of Chief Baxter being pulled away by weeds on the monitor. Depending on what that looked like in real life, it could be filling you with terror or filling you with giggles. I choose terror. There's also the incredible line that Patrick Troughton gets to deliver in the cliffhanger to episode 4. It's begun, the Battle of the Giants, which I totally don't understand, and I think is the sort of line that only could be delivered as the cliffhanger of a television show. My favorite thing in episode 4 is the impeller shaft scenes. First, where Van Lutyens goes down to explore, and later where the Doctor and Jamie go after him. It's just still, it's dark, and then all of a sudden there's this eruption of foam and weed from the shaft, and Van Lutyens gets pulled down. Again, thank you, censors. We can see this clip. Yeah, he's being attacked by dish soap, but it's overwhelming. It's literally overwhelming, I think. It's utterly frightening and horrific, and I love that scene. Then I love the Doctor and Jamie coming down, hope to find him. They don't. They too get almost swallowed up by the foam. I just love the surrounding. I love the sound of it. I love the claustrophobia. I almost chose this as my music choice because I also tried to transcribe the music from these scenes. Thank you, Blu-ray. Some of the existing tracks from the story are heard on the photo gallery section of the Blu-ray release. And yes, quite a bit, if not all, of the soundtrack to Fury from the Deep exists, and I am desperate for it to be released. But at least I can hear them there in about as clean a way as we can. But anyway, the scenes in the impeller are my favorite. They're dark, they're scary, they're sinister, and they fill me with terror every time.
Well, so much for going with your heart, because I would have wrapped up the whole John Abernethy thing in the fact that, you know, Van Lutyens goes down, and that's a terrifically spooky and scary scene. So I might have managed to get myself half a point, but I went with my heart. But who cares? I'm glad Jess. Those impeller scenes are great, aren't they? Not to Peter Kindred, the set designer, as well, because I think they are sort of dark and spooky and shadowy, those sets, and there's a sort of clanging metallicness about them. Yeah, great. I must talk about Peter Kindred. I've been to his house, and he's a very interesting guy. Designed the sets for Fawlty Towers too, and the 10th Planet, which I think is also very nicely designed. I've been very lucky with Fury from the Deep. I've encountered a lot of people from it. Anyway, listen. I can, I think Jess chose a very good thing there. The scenes in the impeller shaft, which I think are really, really scary. Oh, I'm sure the Chief Baxter scene was terrifying. I mean, I think somebody being dragged off by quite a sizable clump of seaweed there. I think with National Theatre actor Richard Mays being the draggee. But I'm still quite pleased that I didn't go down my particular peccadillo. The route of my particular peccadillo, and instead, because I often overlook the regulars, I think, because I take them for granted, because, we have more of them, if you like. Oh, and I didn't finish by saying that Jack May tribute to Patrick Troughton that I've put on my Patreon, if you're listening to this and you're not on my Patreon, I did it 6 months ago. I put it out, and Russell Parker, who's one of the lovely Patreon community, who also, knows what's going on archivally at the BBC and all of that, thinks that it might not exist. So on a C90 upstairs, something that I just used to test this new piece of equipment I've got, I might have uncovered a Doctor Who related piece of something that the BBC, I'm not saying I'm the only person in Britain that has it, but the BBC doesn't have it. Apparently, we don't know. Stay tuned. I'm going to find out tomorrow. 5 months and 30 days ago. Patrons will find out quicker. But that wasn't a ham-fisted way of saying become a patron. I tie that in because I'd started talking about it and then got distracted, going, I can do Jack May. Milo Clancy. But trouble doing impressions because you think you can do it and then you actually do it and you go, I think that might have sounded awful. I've got a blocked up nose and a sore throat. Anyway, the reason I mention it is because, of course, Fury from the Deep, as I watch this, and those couple of impeller scenes come alive, and you think, how much are we missing? How much do we have to imagine? And again, this is such an unusual story, it seems to me. And it's now unusual in a way that it wasn't when I was younger, where we had such vast swathes of Doctor Who missing. You know, so many of its companions in Oblivion, Tomb of the Cybermen, None, the Ice Warriors, None, the Enemy of the World, 3, the Web of Fear, 1, Abominable Snowman I jumped over, 2, Wheel in Space, 6. That was season 5 when I was a boy. None, episode 2. None, episode 3. Episode 1. None, episode 6. And now it's all episode 2. Episodes 1, 2, 3. No, what's of Ice Warriors? Episodes 1, 4, 5, and 6. That was a None. I think I might have missed that out last time. That was a None. Wheel in Space is now all. Web of Fear is 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Fury from the Deep is still None. And Wheel in Space is 3 and 6. So they've all had bits come back. Except for, well, Abominable Snowman is still only 2, but actually I remember there's a Doctor Who magazine, isn't there, where that was a None, but that was before my time. Episode 2 was back by the time I was cognizant of missing episodes. But even that was empty at one point. But now the only None in the whole of season 5 is this one, Fury from the Deep. So I just hope that somebody somewhere doesn't realise that they've got the only copy of something which we would very much like to experience again. I don't know, it just felt quite nice. Now it may be wrong, this Troughton tribute. It may be that the BBC have it, but anyway, just even just entertaining the idea that I might have found something that other people would otherwise not have been able to hear. It's a lovely feeling. It's a lovely feeling. I feel finally, after 48 years, I finally might have made a worthwhile contribution to Doctor Who. But if not, I'll continue doing this instead. But I hope there's somebody out there that can plug some of the gaps of Fury from the Deep, because I don't know. I just think it's a story that could. Well, there are all stories that could benefit from being seen, but I would love to see, what does he call it? Dish foam. That's a lovely phrase of Jess's. I'd like to see the malevolent dish foam and some of these lovely actors. But the atmosphere, that's what I want to see. And a man getting dragged away from the television screen by some homicidal seaweed. Oh, Doctor Who. Only Doctor Who could do that. But yes, it is a weird... It is... Nobody has ever said it's begun, the Battle of the Giants, unless it was with the full knowledge that the title sequence was about to roll. I would like Victor Pemberton to have written some more, because his idea of a cliffhanger just seems to be, I'm going to get somebody to do something now because it's the cliffhanger, rather than because of any sort of story reason or jeopardy. But I kind of like that. But yeah, it is very much you wouldn't say that in any situation, would you? There's some seaweed at the glass. Hang on, I will make a statement about this that is one of import and great weight. Are you doing that for any reason? I've got a feeling we're reaching the end of an episode, which is what we're doing now. So it's ended. The podcast of doom. Well, thank you very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest is Jess Jurkovic. Find his Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who channel on YouTube. He's Jester, Jesster, the number 2 Jazz, Jester 2 Jazz. But yeah, Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who. It's a wonderful part of YouTube with loads and loads of lovely videos, with loads and loads of lovely music. I'm grateful to Jess and to the patrons who make this podcast possible, and they include Andy Larson, Tom Hunter Watts, Christopher Meredith, Luke Cannington, Joanne Abbott, Paul Carrington, Neil Allen, Andrew Fordham, the Missing Episodes Doctor Who podcast, Simon Barker, Grant Davidson, David Hughes, Mark Swan, Rick Moran, Andrew Snedden, Paul Murphy, Paul Goodridge, Christopher Sharp, Christopher Joyce, and Jonathan Molyneux. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. So, if you would like to join, I don't know what that noise was. That noise was of somebody that's got slightly tickly throat, slightly bunged up nose, and slightly throbbing head. But we need to get the furiousness out from under the deep and onto my Patreon page, because I need to keep the patrons fed, and they can be found at the trough at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where every week they get 3 servings of swill in the trough, and it's servings of stuff, some of which is exclusive to patrons, some of which is 6 months earlier, and some of which is not quite as early as that, but still the Indefinable Magic and the Too Much Information podcasts are still a month or 6 weeks ahead of everybody else. And there's also Too Much Information, which is a patron-only podcast, and monthly AMAs, which are patron exclusives, and you get your name read out on the credits like those people then just did. That's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. £3 per month is the lowest tier. You get most of the stuff on that, but there are also higher tiers that get a few other bits and bobs, and you get 10% off if you sign up for a year in advance. You can also go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke if you don't want the monthly commitment. I'm afraid you don't get any of the lovely advantages, but it's a way of, it's like if you saw me busking in the London Underground, can you imagine somebody there doing Mick Hucknall hits and getting a few quid thrown into the hat, and me just standing there pontificating about the savages? People go, oh yeah, I'll give him the shrapnel from my pocket. But that's what Ko-fi does, but it means you're not tied into a monthly commitment, and I totally understand that in these times of financial hardship. But what costs you nothing is to go to iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, all of those places where you can leave comments and where you can give star ratings. And 5 stars would be very, very nice indeed, and a few nice comments too, to give people something to read and some idea of what this is all about, and it might lure them this way, and that makes these midnight endeavours, well, it's actually 1:36 a.m. endeavours, worthwhile. It means I'm not shouting at the moon, and it's just it does help to get traffic this way. So if you could do that, it costs you nothing but a little bit of your time, but it's time well spent, and for which I would be eternally grateful. You can come to my comedy night in Manchester, XS Malarkey, at XS Malarkey on Twitter, and it's every Tuesday at 8 p.m, and there's fantastic comedians from all over the country and sometimes all over the world. There's a Twitch channel as well. We haven't been doing much on that, but there is an archive of stuff up there that we did during the pandemic. Twitch.tv, is it at XS Malarkey? Twitch.tv/XS Malarkey? Oh dear, I don't know. I've said it on all of the other podcasts. If you don't know it by now, and if this is your first Happy Times and Places that you listen to, why are you jumping on episode 4 of Fury from the Deep? I've just remembered this was an episode on some of the missing episodes rumours that were around when I was a kid. Fury from the Deep 4 in colour was one rumour. I remember there was the odd rumour that the occasional Troughton episode had been shot in colour. I suppose that's possibly something to do with the fact that some cine footage exists from Fury, so that might have, that might have melded into, the episode exists in colour. Because, of course, we do have some footage of that lovely shooting in Ealing, of the foam spurting out of the pipes. Oh, well, I'll be talking about that in future episodes. But don't know quite how we started on excess malarkey and ended up on the silly footage from the Ealing filming of Fury from the Deep. But you pays your money, you gets your segues. That's what I do. I think this post-credits thing has probably gone on long enough. I can barely talk. So, thanks for listening. I do like Fury from the Deep. I do like John Abineri. I do have a signed photograph of him. Actually, that's funny, because his spotlight photo that he sent me, because I almost remember thinking it's an odd one to have, because it's got a sort of... It looks like there's a big shadow in the corner and a big blob, and you'd think that's an odd one to choose. But it is a big blob that covers his bald bit. I think he really was sensitive about his balds. Isn't that odd? How I don't think that's the stigma that it once was. I mean, Peter Miles is another one. I love it on the Doctor Who and the Silurians DVD, where the clip of Peter Miles of him being in Doctor Who and the Silurians, he's got less hair than he has on the bit of him from the modern day when he's doing his interview, because obviously he's wearing a bit of a toque. But isn't that how men would have to be, self-conscious about being bald? And now, I mean, God, a lot of people, just shave their heads and get rid of it all. I've not been bold enough to do that quite yet. I think if I had a thinner face, I might. I don't think it quite suit my slightly... I need to lose a bit of weight, but that's... And anyway, should we not get into my shortcomings? Basically, if you've got to the end of the credits for me to go, I'm bald and I'm fat, and it's midnight and I've got a cold. But hey, let's accentuate the positive about an old episode of Doctor Who we can't see. Well, I suppose it's one way to try and keep smiling, innit?